Welcome back to The Line. Elections can be a tricky tightrope act for churches, and this week the Catholic Church has found itself in a delicate balancing act. First, a Santa Fe Catholic Church raised eyebrows with a sign encouraging people to vote pro-life in these upcoming midterm elections. And a political action committee from Texas put out a full-page ad in the Journal and the Santa Fe New Mexican that also included a pro-life message and a breakdown of the two candidates for the governor's stance on those abortion issues. And Diane, the State Conference on Catholic Bishops has denounced the ad and even called on candidate Pierce to denounce the ad as well. But boy, here it is. It really, the big sign in front of St. Anne's, it's an amazing thing. But they're not talking about a candidate, just an issue. Is that okay if it's just an issue?
Technically, I think it complies with what law or tradition we've had.
Okay.
The signs, this is not the first election the signs have been up on the church at St. Anne's.
That's right.
So it's always a very fine balance when you get between church and state and First Amendment rights, because should you not? I mean, what's the difference of putting up a sign or talking about it on the pulpit, at the pulpit?
Right.
So I don't know. I think that, I think it's confusing. Now, using the bishop's letter, I tend to think it's okay. It's a matter of public, it's a public document now. It was sent out as public. I see them use ads using TV journalists talking. And there used to be a unwritten rule: you didn't use the news live recording. So
that's long gone.
That's but I don't think Steve. I don't think Mr. Pierce has to apologize for it or do anything, because this is an independent campaign fund, an independent PAC. He hasn't been coordinating with that. They didn't call him up and say, "Can we run this ad?"
That's right.
And so he should not have to apologize for something any more than the RLCC or the Republican Party, any of them that have run ads.
Exactly. Talking about St. Anne's and Reverend Larry Brito, and he's been in the news before, as Diane just mentioned. His stance is, I think, pretty simple. He's very anti-abortion. He calls it a Holocaust of a sort, and he would be, as a reverend, it would not suit him to stay silent about these things. And he has there would be a lot of people out there who would support that stance, that abortion is so heinous and why are we just being quiet about it? And it is his obligation as a man of the cloth to let people know what his stance about that. Is that a bad thing? I mean,
Well, I think it runs afoul of the law.
Okay.
And as a man of God, I think he should obey the law.
Which sense of the law?
Issue advocacy is not permitted, very close to the election. This is issue advocacy. There may not be a candidate mentioned, although in the newspaper ad, it was very clear who was being endorsed by the Hispanic Action Network ad. And that was, brings in the whole problem of independent expenditures there. But the reverend's or the priest's advocacy really treads that line between a violation of church and state, and whether priests should be able to preach from the pulpit and say, vote for this one or vote for that one, even if they don't use the names. Is that something that runs afoul of a nonprofit tax status that churches have? I mean, that's no corporation, no nonprofit, C3 nonprofit anyway, would be able to do that and maintain their tax status. But apparently the Catholic Church there, St. Anne's, is exempt from that.
Interesting point there. Reverend Brito also uses a comparison to Planned Parenthood, saying Planned Parenthood does this kind of thing all the time. There are PACs that support this. They name names. They support candidates. Same. Why does he get grief and Planned Parenthood doesn't? Is that a reasonable argument when you hear that?
There's a lot of different arguments that can be made along those lines.
A ton.
I think that the attorneys will work out what needs to be litigated, what doesn't, as far as what is against the law, what isn't, what's aligns with the law. But it really comes down to perception and education. And a lot of churches, a lot of church organizations will go ahead and say that we don't want to take a particular position, but here's a survey that we did on the two candidates. You decide for yourself.
I see.
And then there's a perception as far as biblical teachings, say one particular thing on particular issues.
Right.
And, so there's a certain expectation that the church is going to have a particular position because of what the book that they work out of and stuff. So, I don't think there's a whole lot of surprise. I think it's just more of something that makes the headlines at this point.
Good point there. It's about being active and being an activist in your positions. And sometimes when I read these stories about what's going on here, it seems like we've settled in this area, Laura, where a certain kind of person or an issue can be an activist, but if you do it on this other side, it's not seen quite the same. Why doesn't Reverend Brito just get a little credit for being an activist for his position on this? You know what I mean? He's just hanging a sign. He's just doing his thing. He's trying to let folks know where he stands as a reverend on the issue of abortion.
Well,
If it was something else, would it be as big an issue?
so I want to take the question actually that you gave to Tom
Take it.
because it's a legal issue.
Okay.
It's not same, Planned
Okay.
Parenthood and the church
Okay.
and Planned Parenthood. And I think that his comments come from a position of ignorance as to these issues. I mean, it's not his bailiwick. And so he's making assumptions, as a lot of people maybe do, about, well, Planned Parenthood does it, why can't we? And frankly, it's a seventh grade argument. Well, that person did it, why can't I? I mean, that's not a good way to look at it. Planned Parenthood has formed its own political action committee in order to do this properly. If the church, if that particular parish wanted to do that, they could do that and create a separate, and actually the bishops have also done their own. They do
right.
separate, it gets segregated, the funds are separate. He's mixing it all into one pot and he's commingling all of that, and that runs afoul of what the tax laws are. You can't, so there's tax laws and there's state campaign finance laws, and he's essentially creating, I mean, he's not even understanding that those are issues that once he steps into that activist role and starts to campaign and do issue advocacy, as Dee Dee mentioned, he's in that realm now.
Gotcha.
And it does trigger an inquiry. And so just as it would for a nonprofit who didn't register, they could be in danger of doing it too. So the difference is that when Planned Parenthood does it, or any other nonprofit, they have an action network, they have separate, properly organized, I mean, that's the presumption.
Sure.
If not, they
I
would
hear
get
you.
in trouble.
Sure.
But they have the properly organized,
It's a different
corporations to
tax
do it.
status.
Yes,
Right.
it's a different tax
Right.
status. His tax status, or not his, but the church's tax status, has to do with, essentially a faith-based organization. And they have a purpose, and that purpose is not advocating in elections, whether it's issues or candidates. I think that's the big problem there. So he's sort of, he's mixing and mingling all of that.
If he had hung the
But why is
sign
it not
year-round.
faith-based?
Go ahead.
It's his faith.
He's entering into the political fray.
Right.
And that's the problem, is that he's actually spending money, he's doing something within politics. That's where that line is drawn.
Regrettably, Tom's right. The lawyers are going to figure it out. We're out of time. Sorry about that. That's all the time we have for this week. If you want to weigh in on any of the topics we discussed, be sure to reach out to us at NewMexicoInFocus.org or join our Facebook group, Focus on New Mexico.